The elevator was broken again. This was the third time in 6 weeks, and the notice taped to the doors, hand-printed on a piece of printer paper by the building manager, who communicated exclusively through hand-printed notices, said it would be repaired by Thursday. It was Tuesday. Nina stood in the lobby with her laptop bag, her tote, and a box of files she'd brought home from the office because she hadn't finished the report that was due Friday, and the only uninterrupted time she could find was after 10 at night in her own apartment. She looked at the stairs. 5 floors. She started climbing. She was on the 3rd floor landing, shifting the box to her other arm, when she heard the door above her open. Footsteps, descending, purposeful. She pressed to the right to leave room. The woman who came around the landing was old, late 70s, maybe 80, with white hair cut close and the careful walk of someone who had made a negotiation with the stairs a long time ago and kept to the terms. She had a canvas tote on one arm and carried a folded umbrella in her other hand, like a walking stick she wasn't quite using. She looked at Nina. Not a smile, an assessment. 3rd floor, she said. 5, Nina said. The woman nodded once, like this confirmed something. She kept walking down. Nina kept walking up. That was the first time she saw her. If this kind of story, a strange neighbor, a small thing said in a stairwell, the way a person's life can change from a sentence, lands somewhere for you, subscribe. We look at real human situations here, the ones that sneak up on you. Nina Cartwright was 36 and had lived in the Pendleton Arms for 3 years, which was about 2 years longer than she'd planned when she'd signed the lease during a period of transition she'd told herself was temporary. The apartment was a 1-bedroom on the 5th floor of a building in Columbus that was not quite the neighborhood she'd wanted, but was close enough to the office and had natural light in the kitchen, which she decided was non-negotiable. She worked in grants administration for a mid-sized nonprofit that funded literacy programs. It was work she cared about and was good at, and she did it in the specific way of people who are good at things that require attention to detail and tolerance for process. Completely, and at the expense of the parts of herself that existed outside the office. She had a manager who leaned on her because she always said yes, and colleagues who knew she'd cover because she always had. And she went home on most evenings feeling like a container that had been thoroughly used. She had a close friend named Becca who lived in a suburb 20 minutes away and who called regularly and said things like, "You need to draw a line, Nina," in the warm, insistent way of someone who drew lines easily and had never fully understood why that wasn't the same for everyone. She had a mother in Dayton who called every Sunday at 11, and sometimes on Tuesday evenings when something had occurred to her. The calls were warm and also reliable in specific ways. Her mother had opinions about Nina's choices that she delivered as concerns, and Nina received them with the patience of someone who had long ago decided that the cost of not receiving them was higher than the cost of receiving them. She had a habit, which Becca had named and she'd acknowledged and hadn't been able to change, of apologizing before she asked for anything. The neighbor on the 4th floor, she learned from her colleague Jade, who had a cousin who lived in the building, was named Ruth Elaine Garrett. Jade's cousin had described her as a piece of work. She'd lived in the building for 11 years, kept mostly to herself, and was apparently known to tell people directly and without apparent guilt when something they were doing was bothering her. The management company had received, according to Jade's cousin, several complaints about her manner. Nobody had been able to identify anything she'd actually done wrong. "She's just the kind of person," Jade had said, in the way people say that phrase when they've given up on specifics. Nina had nodded and filed it under elderly, difficult, stay polite in the elevator. The second time she saw her was at the mailboxes. Nina came down at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, running late in the accumulated way of a morning where everything took 4 minutes longer than expected. She opened her mailbox, sorted quickly, bill, something from her dentist, a catalog she didn't remember signing up for, and turned to go. Ruth Garrett was at the box 2 down from hers. She was in a gray cardigan over a collared shirt, hair as close-cropped as the stairwell, reading something she'd pulled from her mail with the focused attention of a person who does not look at their phone in public places. She didn't look up when Nina came to the boxes. She didn't look up when Nina turned to leave. Nina said good morning on her way past. The woman said morning without looking up. Nina went to the elevator, which was working again. She rode up to 5 and thought, yes, fine, difficult, noted. She didn't think about her again until the following Saturday. She was on the phone in the hallway outside her apartment. Her mother. The Tuesday call that had migrated to Saturday this week because her mother had had a thing on Tuesday. And she was also trying to unlock her door while holding the phone between her shoulder and ear. And the call had already gone 40 minutes and had covered her mother's friend Patricia's situation in some detail, and was now arriving at a subject Nina recognized by the particular sound of her mother clearing her throat before a new topic. I wanted to ask you about Thanksgiving, her mother said. Okay, Nina said. She got the door open. Because your Aunt Sheila is coming again this year, and I was thinking it would be helpful if you could come the Tuesday before. Not just Thursday, just to help get things organized. Nina put her bag down inside the door. She looked at her calendar on the fridge, visible from the entryway. She kept a paper calendar because she liked to see the month all at once. The Tuesday before Thanksgiving had a note in it already. Work deadline, end of quarter report. Mom, I know you're busy, her mother said, in the voice that acknowledged this while also suggesting it wasn't the most important variable. But Sheila is a lot. You know how she is. And if there's 2 of us managing the setup, it's just so much easier. Nina looked at the Tuesday notation. I can try to leave early, she said. That would be so helpful, sweetheart. I knew you would. The call wrapped up after another 10 minutes. Nina put the phone on the counter. She made tea. She stood in her kitchen and looked at the calendar and thought about the report, and thought about Tuesday, and thought about the phrase, I knew you would, and felt something in her chest that was too tired to be frustration and too present to be fine. She took her tea and went to sit on the couch. In the hallway outside, she heard the elevator. Footsteps. The precise, measured walk she recognized now. She'd heard it twice on the stairs, had identified its pattern. Going down the hall toward the 4th floor. A key. A door. She sat with her tea and the tired feeling and the calendar on the fridge. She didn't see Ruth Garrett again for 10 days. When she did, it was at the door of the building, simultaneously exiting and entering. Nina coming back from the office, the older woman going out with her canvas tote and her umbrella carried low. Hold it, Ruth said. Nina caught the door. Ruth went out. She didn't say thank you. She made a small nod that was something like acknowledgement, not quite gratitude, as though the door holding was a reasonable exchange that had occurred correctly and didn't require additional commentary. Nina stood on the steps and watched her walk to the corner and turn, steady and deliberate. She was hard to place, Ruth Garrett. She wasn't what Nina expected when she expected difficult. Difficult, in Nina's experience, was noisy, demanding, intrusive, big in some way. Ruth Garrett was none of those things. She was just closed off, complete. Like a room where everything was in its place and the lights were off and you understood that you were not being invited in. But no one was being unpleasant about it. She went upstairs and made dinner and didn't think about it. The conversation that changed things happened on a Thursday evening in late October. Nina had been in the elevator, working again, 3rd time that month, when it stopped at 4 and Ruth Garrett got on. She was carrying a grocery bag, the canvas tote, and something in a paper sack from the pharmacy. She noted Nina with a brief look and pressed L. They stood in the small elevator space. Nina's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her colleague Derek, which meant something work-related that was going to require her to think about work. and she felt the specific weight of a call she knew she was going to answer, even though it was 7:15 on a Thursday. She answered it. "Hey," Derek said. "I know it's late. Quick thing." It was not a quick thing. It was a request, framed as a quick thing, as these requests always were, for Nina to take over the quarterly compliance summary that had been assigned to another team member who was now overwhelmed. "You're so much faster at it," Derek said. "It would take you half the time. It's due Monday." Nina stood in the elevator as it reached the lobby. Ruth Garrett walked out. Nina stayed in, the call going, and said, "Let me think about it," in the voice she used when she was going to say yes after a short interval of apparent consideration. She stepped out into the lobby and moved to the side of the doors, still on the phone, running the math in her head. The weekend hours, the existing things she needed to do, the Monday deadline. She was available. She was always technically available. That was the thing about not having plans you were firm about. She said, "Okay, yeah, send it over." Derek said she was a lifesaver. He said it with the easy warmth of someone who knows they're asking for something unreasonable and has decided that warmth is adequate compensation. She knew this. She still said okay. She hung up. Ruth Garrett was still in the lobby. She was at the far end, checking something in her canvas tote, looking for her keys or reorganizing, the kind of small task that takes a minute and anchors you in a place. She hadn't left yet. She looked up and found Nina still standing by the elevator. "Compliance summary," Nina said, because saying it to someone felt better than not saying it. "Someone else's, now mine. Due Monday." Ruth Garrett looked at her. "You said yes." "I said okay, same thing." "Did you want to?" Nina looked at her. "It's for work." "That's not what I asked." The lobby was quiet. Someone's television faintly, one floor up. "No," Nina said. Ruth Garrett found her keys. She put them in her coat pocket. "You said okay," she said, in the same breath as telling me you didn't want to. That's a thing to notice. She went out. Nina stood in the lobby for a moment. She thought about saying something back, and then thought about what she would say, and found that she didn't have a useful response. She went upstairs. She opened her laptop and pulled up the compliance summary Derek had already forwarded. It had arrived before she'd even gotten to her apartment. And she sat at her kitchen table and looked at it, and thought about the woman in the lobby and the question she'd asked. She didn't answer the question. She started working on the summary, but the question sat in the room with her. She knocked on 4C on a Saturday morning. She hadn't planned to. She'd been on her way to the elevator with her laundry and had stopped at the 4th floor for no reason she could articulate, except that the question had been sitting in her for 3 days, and she was tired of the weight of it, and didn't have anyone to talk to about it who wouldn't immediately give her advice that was, in principle, correct, and, in practice, useless. She knocked before she could change her mind. A long pause. Then footsteps. Ruth Garrett opened the door. She was in the gray cardigan again, or a different one, Nina couldn't tell, and she looked at Nina with the assessment expression, the one that wasn't hostile and wasn't warm, just present. "I live on 5, Nina said. "We've been in the elevator a few times." "I know who you are," Ruth said. "Right." A pause. "I wanted to thank you for what you said in the lobby the other night." Ruth waited. "About noticing," Nina said. "The thing about the compliance summary." Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the door wider. "Coffee?" she said. The apartment was the same layout as Nina's, but felt entirely different. Not larger, the square footage was the same, but more deliberate. The furniture was good without being expensive, chosen rather than accumulated. Books on shelves that had been organized at some point and maintained. A single large plant in the living room window that looked like it had been there long enough to have opinions about the light. No clutter. Not sparse, just edited. The apartment of someone who had decided at some point what she wanted to keep and had kept it. Ruth made coffee in a percolator, which Nina hadn't seen in active use in years. She set 2 cups on the small kitchen table and sat across from Nina without ceremony. "What do you want to thank me for specifically?" Ruth said. Nina thought about this. "For asking the question," she said. "Nobody asks me that. Usually people assume I want to help, or they know I will, and that amounts to the same thing." "Do you usually want to?" "Sometimes," Nina said. "Not always. Not lately." Ruth drank her coffee. She didn't say anything immediately, which Nina found she didn't mind. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt chosen, not accidental. "The compliance summary," Ruth said. "Did you do it?" "Saturday," Nina said. 6 hours. Sent it Monday morning." "And did he say thank you?" "He said I was a lifesaver." She paused. "He CC'd our manager when he forwarded it." "Efficient of him," Ruth said. Nina almost laughed. She didn't quite, but something in her face must have shown it because Ruth's expression shifted marginally, not quite a smile, but a flicker of the thing adjacent to it. "Can I ask you something?" Nina said. "You already knocked on my door," Ruth said. "How did you get comfortable with it? Just saying no, not explaining?" Ruth looked at her cup. She was quiet for a moment, and Nina was about to say, "Never mind, sorry, that's probably too personal," when Ruth said, "It didn't feel comfortable at first." "When did it start?" "When I was about 50, Ruth said. "Which is 14 years after it should have." She didn't tell it as a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. She told it the way people tell things when they've lived with them long enough that the sequence isn't the point anymore. She'd been married young, she said. Not unhappily, she was careful to say that, with a precision that suggested she'd thought about how to describe it accurately. Not unhappy, just arranged around other people's needs in a way she'd thought was normal because she'd watched her mother do it and her grandmother before that, and the word for it in the family had not been self-erasure. It had been good wife, good daughter, reliable. She'd worked, taught high school English for 26 years, and she'd also managed the house and her husband's family's expectations, and her own family's expectations, and the particular work of making everyone comfortable enough not to need managing, which is itself a form of constant management. She'd been the person who smoothed things. She'd been good at it. "I was good at it," Ruth said. "The way you can be good at something that costs you a thing you don't notice is being spent until the account is empty." Her husband had died in 2009. Not dramatically, a long illness, not cancer, something else. She'd managed that, too. She'd been excellent at managing it. Afterward, in the year that followed, she'd found herself, for the first time in several decades, without a specific role to maintain. And she'd noticed something, in the absence of the roles, that she didn't have language for at first. It was the sensation of not knowing what she actually wanted when nobody was asking her to want something specific. "I had to learn that," she said, "at 63, what I actually wanted." She said it evenly, not with bitterness and not with self-pity, just as a fact. "That's what I mean when I say it should have started earlier." "What changed it?" Nina said. "I stopped explaining myself," Ruth said. "Not all at once. One thing at a time." She turned her cup in her hands. "I said no to something, and someone pushed back, and I usually, at that point, would have found a way to soften it, found a reason they could accept, made myself smaller so they could feel better. And I just..." She paused. "Didn't. I said, I don't want to, and waited." "What happened?" "They were annoyed," Ruth said. "And then they managed." Nina looked at her. "People manage," Ruth said. "When you stop managing for them, They find a way. Sometimes it takes a minute, but they do. She left an hour later. She stood in the hallway outside 4C for a moment before going to the elevator. The hallway was the same hallway it always was. Beige, institutional, the slightly stale smell of a building that had been heated the same way since 1987. She'd walked past this door 100 times and not once thought about what was on the other side. She went upstairs. She sat in her kitchen with the second cup of coffee she'd brought up in a travel mug from her own apartment and thought about what Ruth had said. Not the big part, the marriage, the years, the 50, but the small, specific part, the annoyance, and then the managing. She thought about her mother and the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. She thought about Derek and the compliance summary and the phrase, "I knew you would." She thought about all the times she'd said, "Okay," in the tone that meant yes, and had also, somewhere underneath it, meant, "Please notice how much this costs me, and please be grateful," and how that gratitude had almost never come in the form she was waiting for, and how she'd kept going anyway, and what exactly she thought was going to change. She opened her laptop. She wrote the first paragraph of the end-of-quarter report she'd been putting off. She wrote it steadily, without stopping, until she had 3 paragraphs, and then she stopped and cooked dinner and ate at the table without her laptop open. She texted Becca, "I met my neighbor today, the difficult one. She's not." Becca wrote back, "Question mark? Tell me." Nina wrote, "She just says no without a speech. I didn't know people actually did that in real life." Becca sent a string of laughing faces, and then, "I have been telling you." Nina put her phone down. She smiled at it briefly, alone in her apartment. She started going to Ruth's on Saturday mornings. Not every Saturday, but most of them. It began without a formal arrangement. She'd knocked twice more in October and November, and by December she didn't knock as much as arrive. And Ruth always opened the door in the gray cardigan and made coffee in the percolator. They talked about things that were not always connected. Ruth had been reading a biography of someone Nina had never heard of and had opinions about the quality of the writing that she expressed with the directness of a longtime English teacher. Nina had started a project at work that was genuinely interesting and found she could talk about it without performing. Ruth asked specific questions. Nina answered them and asked questions back, and found that conversations with Ruth had a quality she hadn't experienced in a long time. The quality of 2 people talking because they were interested, not because they were managing each other. Becca asked in January if Nina was being careful. "She's basically a stranger," Becca said. "She's my neighbor," Nina said. "You know what I mean." "She's 80, Nina said. "I know she's 80. I just—" Becca paused. "I don't want you to get attached to someone who might not be—" "I'm not replacing you," Nina said. A pause. "That's not what I meant." "I know," Nina said. "But she's different. She just talks to me like I'm a full person. It's different." Becca was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said finally. "Okay, I'm glad." The practical test came in February. Her colleague Marcus, different department, different manager, the kind of colleague who appears at your desk with a warm smile and a request that was already decided before the smile, had a situation. He was organizing the regional conference in March, the one that required months of coordination and that everyone understood was a lot of work. And one of the team members who'd been handling registration logistics had to step back for personal reasons. He sat in the chair across from her desk. "You're so organized," he said. "And you've done conference coordination before." "A smaller one," Nina said. 3 years ago." "Exactly, so you know the process." He said it as though her knowing the process was already her agreement. She looked at him. She thought about the February deadline she already had. She thought about the coverage she was already providing for a colleague on leave. She thought about the Saturday mornings and the percolator and the voice saying, "People manage," When you stop managing for them, they manage. I can't take it on, she said. Marcus looked at her. He waited. She recognized the wait. It was the beat during which people expected the softening to arrive, the clarification, but what I could do is, the hedge. She didn't say anything. Is it a capacity thing? Marcus said. Because we could look at, It's a capacity thing, she said. I don't have room for it. He looked at her for a moment longer. She held the look without additional explanation. Okay, he said. I'll ask around. He left. She sat at her desk. Her hands were on the keyboard. She was aware of her heartbeat, which was slightly elevated, the physiological response to having done something that her nervous system classified as danger, even though it was not danger. It was just a man going to ask someone else for something. She took a breath. She looked at her screen. She opened the document she'd been working on before he'd sat down. She worked until 5 and went home. She told Ruth about it on Saturday. Ruth listened without interrupting, which was her habit. She turned her cup in her hands and looked at the window and let Nina finish. What did he say? Ruth said. Okay, he'd ask around. And then? And then he went and asked around. He found someone. She paused. It was fine. Of course it was, Ruth said. I kept waiting for it to feel better, Nina said. I thought I'd feel relieved. I just felt strange. Like I'd done something I wasn't sure was allowed. Ruth looked at her. You had done something you hadn't been allowing yourself. Nina nodded. The strange feeling is accurate, Ruth said. It means you're actually in new territory. She said it without decoration. It'll feel different when it's not new. Nina looked at the large plant in the window, the one that had been there long enough to have opinions. Outside the window, February was gray and flat, the kind of day that has no particular quality except duration. What was the hardest one? Nina said. For you, when you started. Ruth was quiet for a moment. My daughter, she said. My daughter asked me to come and stay for a month when my granddaughter was born. She needed help, genuinely needed help, and I wanted to be there, and a month is too long. For me. She said it precisely. I would have done it the old way, packed for a month and gone and been useful and come home reduced. She turned her cup. I said I'd come for 2 weeks and then we'd see. What did she say? She was hurt. Ruth said it evenly. At first. And then she arranged for other help for the weeks I wasn't there, and I came for 2 weeks and I was actually present for those 2 weeks instead of depleted. And when I left, she said it was the best 2 weeks she'd had. Nina thought about this. I'd been so sure, Ruth said, that more time always meant more love, that the amount I gave was proof of how much I cared, and when I gave less time, less compliance, I thought it meant I was failing her. She paused. I wasn't. I was just giving her something real instead of something exhausted pretending to be real. The percolator had gone quiet. Outside, a car went by on the street below. I have to call my mother today, Nina said. Ruth looked at her. She asked me to come the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, Nina said. I said I'd try to leave work early. She paused. I can't leave work early. That week is... She stopped. I just said I'd try. I always say I'll try when I mean I'll do it even though I can't. Ruth waited. I should call her, Nina said, and tell her I'll come Thursday. Yes, Ruth said. She'll be disappointed. Probably, Ruth said, and then she'll make other arrangements for Tuesday. Nina looked at the window. What if she doesn't? Then Sheila will be a lot without you there, Ruth said, which she probably is anyway. Nina almost laughed again, and this time did, a small, surprised sound. Ruth's expression did the thing it did sometimes, the flicker. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count. She called her mother on the way home. She didn't wait until she was in the apartment. She dialed on the 4th-floor landing, standing by the fire door, because if she went upstairs, she'd put it in the category of things to do later, and later would become Thursday, and Thursday would become the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Her mother picked up on the second ring. "Nina, hi! I was just thinking about you." "I wanted to catch you before the week got busy," Nina said. "About Thanksgiving. I can't come Tuesday. I'll be there Thursday morning." A pause. "Oh," her mother said. "I have a deadline that week, and the front end of it is heavy." "I see." A pause. "It's just that Sheila is—" "I know," Nina said. "I'm sorry I can't make Tuesday work. I'll be there Thursday, early. I can stay through the weekend." Another pause. Her mother was rearranging something in her head. The logistics, the expectations, the shape of a week she'd built around an assumption. "Well," her mother said, "I suppose we'll figure out Tuesday." "I think you will," Nina said. They talked for a few more minutes, about other things, the regular things, and her mother's voice was warm by the end, the disappointment not gone, but not the whole temperature of the call. When they hung up, Nina stood on the landing with the phone in her hand. Her heart was doing the thing again, the elevated thing. She breathed. She went upstairs. Spring came in the particular way Ohio springs come, as if the decision wasn't final. The warm days interrupted by cold ones, everything tentative until suddenly it wasn't. By April, Nina had been to 4C enough times that the coffee was made by the time she knocked, which was the domestic version of being expected. They had an understanding that didn't have a name. Ruth never asked how Nina was doing in the way that invited performance. She asked what was going on, which was different. It assumed there were specifics and waited for them. Nina found herself giving specifics. Ruth gave them back when they were relevant and stayed quiet when they weren't. Nina told her, in April, that she'd started saying no to the smaller things. Not dramatically, she hadn't made an announcement. She just said it, when it was true, and waited. "What happens?" Ruth said. "Sometimes nothing. Sometimes the person is annoyed for a minute and then asks someone else." She paused. "Sometimes they're confused, because I don't think they've heard it from me before." "How does it feel?" "Strange," Nina said. "Still, but less strange than it did." Ruth nodded. "My manager asked if something was wrong," Nina said. "I've turned down 2 extra things this month. She asked if I was okay." "What did you say?" "I said I was figuring out what I could do well versus what I could technically do." She paused. She said that was a mature approach. Ruth made a sound that was the beginning of a laugh, restrained before arrival. "I think she was surprised," Nina said. "People usually are," Ruth said, "when you stop performing." May brought a block party. The building participated reluctantly in the street's annual May event, which meant a folding table out front with some food and the expectation that residents would mill around for an hour and be neighborly. Nina went because she'd been asked by the building manager, which was different from before. Before, she would have gone because it would have felt wrong not to. Ruth came out for 20 minutes. Nina found her at the edge of the table, examining the food offerings with the expression of a woman with opinions about potato salad. She came to stand beside her. "Too much mayonnaise," Ruth said without preamble. "Is it?" Nina looked at the potato salad. "It always is at these things." They stood together at the edge of the table. A neighbor who Nina knew slightly by name came over, asked if they'd tried the dip, was told by Ruth that she didn't care for dip in general, and moved away in a slightly uncertain direction. Nina watched him go. She said, "Was that necessary?" Ruth looked at her. "He asked. He was making conversation. I gave him information." Ruth considered the table again. "He now knows not to ask me about dip." "That's one way to look at it," Nina said. It's a kinder way than the alternative, Ruth said. The alternative is I smile and say, "Looks great," and he thinks I like dip, and the next time there's an event he makes a specific point of telling me about the dip because he thinks we have a connection about it. Nina considered this. Actually, that's not wrong, she said. It's not about being harsh, Ruth said. It's about being clear. The harsh version would be lengthy. She turned slightly. I don't have the energy for lengthy anymore. They stood together a while longer. Nina ate something and watched the street and let the afternoon do what it was going to do, which was continue being an afternoon. After a while, she said she was going to go upstairs. Ruth said she was too. They went up together. At the 4th floor, Ruth said goodnight and went down the hall, and Nina went up the last flight. Standing in her own hallway, she thought, I've known her 7 months. She thought about what that time had looked like from the outside, from anyone watching. 2 people crossing in hallways, brief encounters at mailboxes and lobby doors, the unremarkable geography of neighbors. And from the inside, which was different. Which looked like the slow, unglamorous work of a woman learning a thing she should have known and wouldn't have believed she needed someone to show her. She went inside and made dinner. Her mother came to visit in June. This was not a regular thing. It happened every year or two, a weekend, the particular logistics of a mother visiting a daughter's apartment for the first time in 18 months. Nina cleaned and stocked and prepared in the way she always had, and then she looked at the prepared apartment and thought, I did most of this for me. That was new. The wanting her mother to be comfortable had always been tangled up with the needing her mother to see the apartment as adequate, as proof that Nina's choices were the right ones. She was starting to be able to tell the difference. Her mother arrived on a Friday evening and immediately identified several things in the apartment she had opinions about. The kitchen organization, the lamp in the corner that was wicker and that her mother felt was a fire hazard, the absence of anything green in the refrigerator. Nina let her express the opinions and agreed with the one about the lamp. Saturday morning, her mother asked about the weekend. Nina said she had plans in the morning. Not long, a couple of hours. She'd be back by 11. Her mother asked what plans. Nina said she visited a neighbor on Saturdays, a friend in the building. A friend? Her mother said. I didn't know you had a friend in the building. I do now, Nina said. What's she like? Nina thought about how to describe Ruth Garrett. She thought about the elevator, the lobby, the first time she'd heard the question, did you want to, and had not had a clean answer. She thought about the percolator and the opinions about potato salad and the 2 weeks instead of a month and the word clear used as a form of kindness. She says what she means, Nina said, and she doesn't say things she doesn't mean. Her mother looked at her for a moment. That sounds like it could get tiring. It's the opposite, Nina said. She knocked on 4C at 9:30. Ruth opened the door. She was in the gray cardigan, and she looked at Nina with the assessment expression and then passed her briefly at the hallway. Your mother's visiting, Ruth said. Nina blinked. How did you know? I heard her in the stairwell yesterday, Ruth said. She was on the phone. Nina came in and sat at the kitchen table, and Ruth made coffee, and they talked about Ruth's book. A new one, a history of something she found more interesting than she'd expected, and about a thing Nina had read that week that had made her think. At 10:45, Nina said she should go back. Ruth nodded. Nina stood. She looked at the apartment, the good furniture, the edited surfaces, the plant in the window doing what it had always done. Ruth, she said. Thank you. For this. Saturdays. She paused. You didn't have to let me knock on your door. Ruth looked at her, the assessment, and then something behind it. I have a ground rule, Ruth said. For anyone in my life, if they add more to the room than they take out of it, they can stay. She turned back to the percolator, which she was rinsing. You add more. Nina stood in the kitchen. Go have lunch with your mother. Ruth said. Nina went. She walked down the hall to the stairwell and up one floor and into her apartment where her mother was sitting at the table with tea, and she sat down across from her, and her mother asked if she was hungry, and Nina said, "Yes, let's go somewhere, wherever you want." They went out. On the street, her mother said, "What's her name, the neighbor?" "Ruth," Nina said. "Is she—" her mother started, and then stopped and started differently. "She sounds like she's been good for you." Nina looked at the street, the June morning, the ordinary Columbus Saturday, the particular quality of early summer light that makes everything feel slightly more possible than it is. "She has been," she said. Ruth went to visit her daughter in August. 2 weeks, the same arrangement she described in February. Chosen, bounded, real in the way things are real when they're not depleted. She left on a Tuesday, and Nina didn't see her for the 2 weeks and came home every day to a fourth floor that was the same fourth floor, just slightly quieter. She noticed the quiet. When Ruth came back, Nina knocked on Saturday. "How was it?" she said. Ruth sat down at the table and said, "She's good. The baby's good." She said it with the specific warmth of someone who has learned to hold love at the exact weight it is, without adding weight to prove it. In September, Nina's review came up. Her manager said she'd noticed over the past several months that Nina had gotten better at scope, at identifying what she could do fully versus what she was accepting out of habit. She said the quality of Nina's work had improved. She said she wanted to talk about what a more senior path might look like. Nina sat in the meeting and listened to her manager describe the things she'd noticed and felt something she didn't usually feel in these conversations, which was recognized. Not for what she was willing to do, but for what she was actually doing. She told Ruth about it on Saturday. Ruth listened. She turned her cup. "Well," she said. "I know," Nina said. "Will you take it?" "I think so," Nina said. "I want to think about it carefully first." "Good," Ruth said. They sat in the Saturday morning quiet. The plant in the window, the percolator on the counter, done for the morning. September light through the glass, the beginning of the autumn quality, cooler and more honest than summer. "I want to ask you something," Nina said. Ruth waited. "Why everyone else?" Nina said. "In the building. You're polite, you're not rude, but nobody's knocked on your door the way I did." Ruth looked at her. A long moment. "Some people," she said, "mistake clarity for hostility. If you don't smile automatically, if you don't explain yourself more than necessary, they decide you're difficult." She said it without bitterness. "It used to bother me. Now it just narrows the field to people worth talking to." "That's a bleak way to put it," Nina said. "Is it?" Ruth said. "I'm 80 years old, Nina. I don't have time for the other kind." Nina looked at her cup. "You knocked," Ruth said. "That was interesting. People don't knock." "I wasn't sure you'd open it." "I wasn't sure I would either," Ruth said. She said it simply, the way she said things that were true and that other people would have wrapped in more. Nina sat with it the way she'd learned to sit with things Ruth said, not filling the space immediately, letting the sentence be what it was. Outside, a car went by. September, doing September things. "Same time next week?" Nina said. Ruth looked at her with the expression that was almost a smile. "Coffee will be ready," she said. If this story left you thinking about someone, a neighbor, a person you walked past and categorized too quickly, or a version of yourself that's been waiting for permission, leave a word in the comments. We'll be here.